Hello, welcome to Hidden Women Books. We've been looking into women's names as part of our research into Celtic Europe, and we've made some interesting discoveries in France. In this clip, we'll discuss the name Suzanne. Why names? Information can be passed down through naming when other avenues are closed. Names may serve as a kind of memorial that may withstand destructive forces better than statuary, writings, pictures, or heroic epics, which seem to be the standard ways of ancient veneration. So I'd like to give you a few dates so that you can put this talk into context a little bit better and put the Celtic memorials into context, because from what we see, this was a practice early on with the Celts that continued throughout and is part of our own legacy from those times even now. So this is a timeline of Roman and Christian conquests of Celtic Europe. We know that Celts inhabited Europe from the British Isles all the way to Anatolia as early as 6000 BCE. We're finding a lot of evidence earlier than that, but for our purposes today, let's just assume that and start from there. Now, in the first 1,000 years before the current era, around 850 BCE, iron smelting in Hallstatt, Austria, completely changed the face of Europe because of the opportunities afforded by iron smelting, and it ushered in a whole new age of prosperity. In around 52 years before the current era, Julius Caesar came up from Rome into Celtic Europe and slaughtered about a third of the population. Those are the estimates that we have found. Around the 400s, this is after the beginning of the current era, the Celts managed to recapture former capitals in the Rhineland from the Romans, and we feel certain that that was what precipitated the fall of the Roman Empire, which has been set to around 476. But all of these things took place over periods of time. From the 5th to the 15th century, duchies formed the Celtic defense system in Europe. From what we can see, dukes and duchesses both were officials that led in the calling of troops. From the 4th to the 18th century, Roman heresy laws attempted to criminalize secularization in Europe. From the 11th to the 13th century, Christian crusaders depopulated southwest France and the area of East Germany, Poland, Lithuania. In the 15th century, the last duchy, Burgundy, fell to imperial Habsburg rule. Suzanne shines like a ray of light into a darkened ancestral Europe to let us see a little more clearly what happened there. It's a name that connects the Middle East with Europe and draws on law. We've looked at France for specifics, but the implications here are global. The emerging picture of pre-Christian Europe shows that women like Suzanne played a role in the Celtic world's phenomenal successes. It boils down to this. Celtic Europe honored its women. Christian Europe enslaved them. Women were chattel to the church state. Conquerors give a false account of this past. That's why we need to create a reliable body of knowledge from the ground up. Archaeological finds build the skeleton, and names help flesh it out. Names carry information when other memorials cannot. Statuary is smashed, books are burned, pictures are trashed, but it's harder for conquerors to eradicate names. Celtic names are very literal, and we find that to be invaluable. They describe geographic features and landmarks like hills and rivers. The name Suzanne itself probably attached to a place first and was carried from there to other places. From what we see, pre-Christian Europe operated much like our family does. So we may be much closer to European and to Middle Eastern ancestors' lives than we've ever thought possible. And we need to learn from them. When you look at all the different places the members of our family are from, it's a microcosm of the entire world. And we're convinced that Celts were the same way. We know that Iron Age Celts honored heroes for valor and invention, and we know that from our own family too. Celts made memorials to women throughout time across Europe, and we remember our own heroic women. When Christians took over Celtic Europe, they subverted these practices and distorted the record. And the story of Suzanne gives a hint of how that was done. There's no reason to believe that our forebears operated any differently between the Iron Age and today. And the name Suzanne supports that notion. Actually, the name Suzanne comes from Jewish tradition. Names traveled from the Levant to Europe with the immigrants. When I took part in the National Geographic Genome Project, I found that Mother's side of the family belonged to the tribe that was first to leave Africa, then spent tens of thousands of years in the Middle East before following a major land route into Europe. The name Suzanne may well have taken that same path. The story of Suzanne tells of an attempted crime and how she handled it. Like our Suzanne, we can imagine that she did it deftly and with incisive wit. Wouldn't you love to have seen this? This legend has been described as the first cross-examination, and it goes something like this. Suzanne was bathing in her gardens when two old men accosted her. She fended them off, so they accused her of adultery. Now here we have to stop and realize how grave a situation this was. Christianity turned Celtic town squares into carnage arenas. Massive numbers of women were burned at the stake there. Under Roman church state laws, adultery was an act punishable by death there. So a lot was at stake when Suzanne objected to the old men's claims. She asked that one of them be sent out of the room, while the other was asked this question: under what kind of tree did the alleged behavior take place? One said a mastic, the other an oak, and Suzanne prevailed. Let's talk about the meaning of the word Suzanne itself and break it down to Suz and Anne. Suz references water sources, and here I want to bring in the Slovenians. Every Slovenian feels a driving force to visit the source of their rivers, and we see that directly as descending from the Celtic veneration of nature. Slovenians are rabid about their hot springs, and with good reason. Early Europeans survived winter by staying at hot springs, and Slovenia has a wealth of them. So for Slovenians, there's the immediate joy of luxuriating in hot mineral baths, but with the knowledge that ancestors have been there too. Bear in mind that Slovenia has been inhabited for some 250,000 years. The second part of the name Suzanne, the Anne part, this is where we have issues. Anne is interpreted to mean deity. In all the archaeological artifacts and digs we've seen, we have yet to find anything to suggest that the Celts worshipped any gods. For sure, Celts venerated heroes, but they were also scientific and exact. We see nothing to indicate superstition or unfounded belief systems in the Celtic culture. They gathered in the halls to celebrate the equinox, all at the same time, all across the Celtic world. They laid out their roads, arrow straight along solstice lines. Acts like these do not equate to sun worship, but to gratitude for the benefits of the sun and being able to predict its course through the sky. We see nothing to suggest that Celts worshipped unseen masters or that they prayed to a father who sacrificed his son. No, those practices came from Christians who used religion to subjugate the Celts, and they used it to great and lasting effect. Mistakes have been made, and we feel that the interpretation of Anne might be one of them. Early archaeologists wrongfully identified some women warriors' graves as men. That's why we're convinced that Anne means hero rather than God. Let's shift gears now and look at a place. In France alone, there are 8 Suzannes, but only 2 are simply Suzanne. 6 are Saint Suzanne. We want to show you one of the Saint Suzannes, while noting that the saint was undoubtedly added by conquerors. Saint Suzanne is a walled village, which means that the area was threatened with attack. It occupies a prime location halfway between Paris and the Atlantic Ocean. The Suze part of the name is apt here. Saint Suzanne has ample water, and it lies a short 20 miles from hot springs. That means that early settlements could stay here year-round. The other interesting connection that we see is with iron, the technological breakthrough that brought prosperity to all Iron Age Europe. There's another link to the Celtic past in Saint Suzanne, a hill fort. Fortifications have been necessary here for a long time. From ancient hill fort to medieval walled village, Saint Suzanne has served as sanctuary. There's even evidence of an older land use here going all the way back to the Stone Age. The Dolmen des Herbes was a huge burial chamber made from locally quarried stone. Only the portal of the massive structure remains today. In Saint Suzanne, even the street names help you navigate to the great gardens, covered crossing, riverbank, new bridge, big mill, the farms. And in another watery connection, the name of the river that runs through the town derives from Gaelic and means running water. So we see the name Suzanne as carrying information about an ancient veneration of water, the natural resource that sustained all of the early travelers as they made their way up from Africa to the Middle East and Europe. The fact that there is a Jewish legend about early legal proceedings also associated with the name Suzanne tells us that a woman living in the Levant may have contributed an important element of dispute resolution to the legal process, namely cross-examination. The occurrence of so many places named Suzanne in France, 8 of them, indicates the widespread use of the name by early settlers bringing the name into Europe from the Middle East. That 6 of the 8 places named Suzanne now have saint in the names shows that 3/4 of them succumbed to the Christian conquest. And again, we look at France as indicative of general Celtic practices wherever Celts settled. We associate Suzanne with Celts because of the Celtic veneration of natural resources. Although we found nothing to support the usual notion that Celts worshipped any gods, we see the widespread Celtic practice of honoring heroes that sustained their lives. Celts appear to venerate heroes that are concrete, from the sun to women warriors. And we're seeing that those heroes can be both living or inanimate, and honored in statuary pictures, heroic epics, and names. And again, this Celtic veneration differs completely from Christian worship. Christianity brought the mandate of blind obedience to an unseen master, but we see no such inclinations in pre-Christian Europe before the Christian conquest. So if the Celts came from Africa through the Middle East, when did Celts start being called Celts? Was likely when they began mining and trading salt, because we know that Roman historians referred to them as Celts. You'll remember that sel means salt in French, and we see many connections between the ancient Celtic language and French. Why is there a Celtic association with the name Suzanne? Because the Celts chose descriptive naming, and regardless of language, that still comes through, and we're so thankful that it does. We've loved having you with us to discuss the name Suzanne, and we look forward to the next time. Thanks so much. All the best.